Here we go.
Money talk.
Here comes the money. Money, money, money.
Dollar, dollar.
Dollar, dollar. Cheating, cheating, bling, bling, got the chatter. You ain't talking money, then you're talking no matter.
Now, this time period took place around 1750 all the way up to 1950, which is about 200 years. And during this period in theater, it was all about the wealth and capitalism and just getting as much money in the theater as possible. And the theaters really relied on ticket sales to do this. Technology played a huge role in the commercialism period of theater, with advancements such as the steam engine, paved roads, and the railroad system. Companies were able to travel a lot easier and a lot faster and a lot further to bring the production pretty much anywhere they wanted to worldwide to get a lot more audience members to see their piece. Also, theaters were also growing physically in size with a lot more room for audience members, which meant more ticket sales per showing, which brought in more money for them. And the stages and the complexity of the stage also grew with more complex scenery and such. And before 1830, most of the theaters and stages were all lit up with candles. But after 1830, they used gas lamps, which caused a lot of fogging to build up on the ceiling. But about 1880 brought electric lights, and they first showed up in the theater in London. Commercialism also brought a lot of change within acting itself, and theaters saw a lot of change as far as the shared companies going away. And the shared companies, as we know, is when the actors and other people involved in the theater actually owned the theater itself and got a share. But now actors wanted more of a salary base in commercialism, a lot more greed and a lot more money involved with getting a salary rather than owning a piece of the theater. And also the lead actor in the company almost became like a manager of the entire actors. And to me, that would seem like it would cause a lot of drama, no pun intended. And also the star system came about in theater. And the star system, as we know, brought a lot of travel with the big theater stars all across the world. And that brought around some trouble with the local actors at a theater basically only being there to support the star who was traveling. And even that changed once the stars started bringing their own supporting actors. There was a lot of changes in drama during this period, but there was three major changes, and the first was sentimentality, and that really meant bringing out a lot of emotion in the audience. That's what they thrived on during this period, and a lot of plays were based on good versus evil, with a lot of emphasized values such as family, loyalty, work, fidelity, and obedience to superiors, which we'll talk about more in the melodrama section. The second big change during this time period would be the change of the active to the acted on, which really meant that these stories and plays were mostly focused on victims rather than heroes. They had a lot of real world problems and situations going on in the story, and instead of a very heroic protagonist, most of the main characters were all victims of these issues that actually happened to real world people during this time. The third big change for this time period would be the collapse of genre. Now, neoclassicism rules were basically crumbling during this time period and just thrown out the window completely, and the idea of genre actually just seemed to not exist at all, and tragedy pretty much did not happen anymore, and comedy was just looked at as basically a play with a happy ending. Now, one thing that did come out is the melodrama, and that became the very hot thing to do for a company, and it was very popular with audiences during this time. The term melodrama means music drama, which is pretty appropriate for this genre of theater, as throughout these plays they used a lot of emotional music and scoring throughout the entire piece, and they even use signature music for certain characters or themes throughout the show that would pop up frequently, so the audience would build a connection with the music to that character. And the ideas behind these melodramas were usually the ideas of good versus evil that became a huge topic to talk about, a lot of morals and everything. And the world in which these stories took place was pretty simple, and the lines between good and evil were pretty much cut and paste. There was no gray area. You were good or you were bad, and the good had to beat the bad. And these productions were very popular, with all the adventure and emotions and even some scattered laughter throughout the pieces. Uncle Tom's Cabin, which was originally a story written by Harriet Stowe, became the most important and popular realistic melodrama during this time. And the story that she wrote was basically stolen from her and adapted for theater without any compensation for her, because there was no copyrights during this time. That was until a gentleman called Dion Bouchishalt demanded a percentage from the box office. He was an Irish playwright, and instead of a flat fee, he wanted a royalty from all the ticket sales each night. And so this started a huge trend, and eventually, because of these royalties, by 1866, the first copyright agreement was made for an artist. So royalties and copyrights really came out of this era in theater, which we still use today. Because this era in theater was all about making money, it is pretty safe to say that the attempts and even success of monopoly occurred. And by the end of the 19th century, the group called the Theatrical Syndicate started to take over, and this saw the end of stock and trade companies, and it was a money maker, money machine. They were basically owned anything and everything and created their own little circuits for the companies. And this caused the actors to form a union to band together and fight for actor rights and money. And the first strike for actors actually occurred in 1916. This is kind of sad because money became way more important to the theaters and the companies than the actual art piece. They were more concerned about ticket sales and bringing in as much money as possible than really the value of their piece and the quality of their piece. Commercialism declined in theater for many reasons, one of them being the creation of film, and the first full-length feature film was Birth of a Nation, which came out in 1915, and film just became a lot more exciting. It was new, it was different, it was recorded life, and people just started getting drawn more into film rather than theater. And by the 30s, just 15 years after the first silent film came out, Hollywood was already making millions in their box office with just ticket sales going through the roof. And theaters were actually being turned into movie houses because movies became so much more popular. The problem was these theaters couldn't make enough money due to the Depression and World War II and everything, and so ticket prices, I wouldn't say became unreasonable, but they became too much for the middleman or the everyman to afford, and with film taking over, theater just didn't stand a chance. Thank you for listening to this little presentation on commercialism in theater. Why you should care about it is because during this time period, a lot of things came out that we still use today that wouldn't have happened, such as actor unions and the idea of royalties and copyrights for artists to get paid for their work, get paid for all the effort they put in, and to cut down on people stealing other people's work. And so those ideas are still very much important to our culture today, not just in theater, but in film and music and really any sort of art production out there. And so without this time period in theater, those things may not exist or may have taken much longer to come about.